everyone. Thank you, Bridget, and great job, Jeff, ruining my morning, making it very difficult to follow something like that. I have no videos, but hopefully I can entertain you for a little while. Jeff and I actually worked at the same agency at the same time, the one that where everybody was encouraged to bitch about each other, that one, and we both went off and started companies on our own after working there, which I think says something. So Bridget did a great job introducing me. It's funny, I use this sketch all the time, and it turns out it's a little bit like if you're wanted by the police, because I get this in the lobby a lot, like, hey, aren't you the author of Above the Fold? It's like, you found me. So I'm really excited to say that the second edition of Above the Fold, or the revised edition, is coming out this month. It's been rewritten and reorganized to make a lot more sense, because the first cake that you bake is never the best cake you bake. So this is the second cake I've ever baked, and it's, I think, a lot better and a lot more informative, but a lot of the principles are still in there, which I'm very proud of. So I like to start with a sports analogy on these talks, but I learned a really valuable lesson that if you go to Chicago, do not start with something about Vince Lombardi, especially if it's positive, because you will get blown up on Twitter like there's no tomorrow. How are you going to come to Chicago and talk about... Apparently there's a big rivalry between the Packers and the Bears, but I figured Ted Williams was pretty safe, and the thing about Ted Williams is he would make a really bad batting coach, because his philosophy was see the ball, hit the ball, right? And that's a short presentation and not very valuable to any of you. Well, luckily for you, I am not the Ted Williams of information architecture, far from it. In fact, it's something that I struggle with on an ongoing basis. And I get the sense that a lot of designers do too. I've actually worked at agencies where it's always about design first, because that's where we come from. So very often at Razorfish or even Moda Media, we would do the design. How many of you have done this? And then kind of trace over it for the wireframe so it looks as if you have some sort of process. I don't do that anymore. And I'm going to talk about a little bit about why and how I've been able to make wireframes and sitemaps and information architecture a useful part of my process, and how it makes the design itself better. So that's what we'll be talking about. So remember when websites looked like this? That information architecture looked like this, and it was pretty simple. It was almost only a pre-designed sketch. But now websites not only look like this, they do much more for the user. So it's not about information gathering. It's much more about accessibility or being able to perform a function. And illustrating or mapping out those functions becomes much more complicated. So this was actually a project I worked on when I was at Razorfish, and this was one of the IA drawings that we had for it. And it's all about, you can see the customer at the top, the brand at the bottom, and all of the different ways that a customer engaged with the brand, whether it was logging into Netflix in a hotel room or registering through a banner ad or whatever the touch points were, they need to be considered now. Nothing happens in a vacuum. And I think this is where information architecture really comes in handy. To be able to sketch out flows and the way things will work prior to applying a style to it is good for a design team as well as the client to understand the process of things. So a popular element in the Above the Fold book illustrates how web design and web pages have changed over 25 years. Starting in '93 with very basic web design, moving through to today, and even beyond. This stops in 2010. So as I've been saying, when websites looked like this, it was very much, information architecture was very much about what's going to be on the page and where does it go. And that was sort of the beginning, middle, and end of it. And IAs kind of organized the content and just got a point A to point B kind of mentality with everything. And as I've been saying, that has moved on. Now, sort of 2001 to 2005, the web has become much more of a utility, more transactional, more form-driven, more engagement by the user rather than simply reading. So we developed these things called user flows, user scenarios, showing the path in which people would move through the site. And that helps with design, but it certainly helps with achieving business objectives within the project. And now, of course, we're in this user-centric, mobile-first environment where many, many considerations come into play. And really, web design has become, for a lot of us, some people are still designing Joe's Bagels, and that's totally fine. But in many ways, web design has been about creating an experience. And information architecture can help with that. So I like to think about information architecture as design thinking. It's a different way of looking at it. And I'm about to illustrate the difference between what I call design and design thinking. So for 100 years, this was the Heinz ketchup bottle. And year over year, they would redesign it. And they would make it prettier or uglier based on style, based on what was appropriate for that time, what the customer liked at that time. Information architecture is design thinking applied to customer-centric problems. So here's the iconic Heinz ketchup bottle, right? This is the latest design. There's a couple problems with it, though. Does anybody know how to get Heinz ketchup out of the bottle? Does anybody know the secret? What, do you know the secret? A knife. Anybody else? Yeah, you tap the 57, right? I've heard that. You shake it up. So let's just imagine that Heinz 57 bottle is a website and the ketchup is content, right? This doesn't happen today. Even though this is an iconic piece of design, it's a beautiful piece of design. If I put that silhouette up there, very much like a Coca-Cola bottle, you might recognize it. But the design thinking behind it satisfies only one need: keep the ketchup fresh. In fact, they've turned this major bug into a feature. It's worth the wait, right? You can wait for your ketchup for your fries. I can't, but maybe there is an audience out there that can. So the difference between this bottle, which is design, and this bottle, in my opinion, which is design thinking, is it still has elements of design, it still has elements of the brand, but the user can engage with it much more easily. In fact, it's hard to keep the ketchup in sometimes, right? And that's what you're trying to do when you develop websites. It's not simply about, if I just go back here, how to make a better bottle shape. It's how to engage with the customer more effectively and how to give them what they want while maintaining all of those other things, keeping the ketchup fresh and illustrating the brand. Inevitably, though, when you go to a diner, what do you see? You see this, which really annoys me. It's like, are we really that entrenched in culture that the cap has to go on top? My wife does that in the shower, like with the bottle of shampoo. It's like, no, they made this giant top so the shampoo would be ready for me. So it's very, very annoying, but that's also another challenge, if I can beat this analogy to death, there's always that element of usability, of users, that can always throw a monkey wrench into the best laid plans. And in fact, Heinz was kind enough to carry this analogy through to the mobile world. So these are the old packets, and you had to kind of bite them like this, and then they'd squirt all over your shirt. Now, you can tear at the top to squeeze, or you can pull it off to dip. Again, maintaining the design elements, but a much higher degree of consideration of how the item is used. So I like to talk about design thinking a lot because I think it helps us all get a little bit deeper into our projects. And one of my favorite examples of design thinking is UPS. I'm a little bit bummed that they got rid of Paul Rand's logo, and they have brown trucks. So it's a good example because brown trucks and this sort of weird logo doesn't exactly scream design the way, say, Apple does, right? But UPS does some amazing things when it comes to design thinking. For example, you'll never see a UPS truck making a left-hand turn. The logistics people at UPS map out the routes that all the trucks take to maximize the number of right-hand turns. And they do this because making a left-hand turn causes you to idle. And idling, waiting for oncoming traffic, causes you to waste gas. And it causes you to waste time. So the design thinking that went into how can we get more efficient with our truck fleet, a designer might redesign the truck, but a design thinker redesigns the route that the truck takes. And that's really at the heart of information architecture. And it's an interesting way of thinking. So we used to think of IA as the first step in the design process. Or if you worked at some of the companies I did, you would sort of squeeze it between design and development as a toss-in. But that's a little bit like thinking about dinner like this, where everything is in its own little compartment. I'm probably dating myself a little bit with this reference. But these are TV dinners, and you know, your peas and carrots never really hit your potatoes, and nothing ever collaborated. I like this diagram a little bit better, where IA is actually very much to do with development, and I like to see IA touching development in some sort of a process diagram like this. And design thinking spans the entire process. A little bit like this. Does anybody know what those two people are doing? Chocolate and peanut butter, thank you. Apparently one of the Rhodes Scholar people wandered in. Yeah, so these two people are listening to their headphones because they had their Sony Walkmans, and they bumped into each other with their jar of peanut butter and their bar of chocolate, and they got their chocolate into their peanut butter. And so it's a metaphor for integrating the design process and the development process and the IA process all at once. A few unlicensed imagery in here, so hope the police aren't here. I just felt the need to have a chart like this. User needs, technology, and content all come together for information architecture. So I thought I would walk through a couple of ways in which we use information architecture, which might be very similar to how you use it, I don't know, to help facilitate the process, not slow it down so we can have a preset deliverable. So a project we've just finished was Schick.com, the razors. And they had a pretty terrible website that came about because they have 10 distinct different brands. If you know Schick, they have 6 women's brands, 4 men's brands, and it was sort of a series of landing pages. So every time you clicked, you would go to a new site with different navigation. It was an information architecture nightmare. And to top it off, half of their customers search by brand, I want the Quattro, and the other half search by, I want a disposable. So we had to wrangle all of these brands under one roof, and these 2 different searching methods needed to be layered on as well. So a sitemap here became very important. This is where so if this were a simple site, we might not do a sitemap, but in this case, the sitemap became very important. So here you can see the sitemap for Schick.com. I'll zoom in a minute, but basically you have this binary gate. Are you a man or a woman? And you would go to the men's or women's side. And then we were able to group the content. I'm a very visual person as a designer, and I'm sure a lot of you are as well. So I can see Excel spreadsheets, I can see Word documents, I can get emails, and nothing brings it to life the way this does, to see the relationship of all the pages, to see where there is content, where there isn't content. For example, Schick Extreme 3 is only disposable. It does not have a system product. So this really helped us visualize the landscape of the site. And there's various keys, things. Shared content is outlined in pink here. And I'm going to talk a little bit about how to create wireframes in InDesign after we look at a couple examples. I teach a class at the How University, How U, online, and it's an information architecture class, and the first assignment is to create a sitemap for smartusa.com, and the trick about it is it's a single-page site, so everybody seems to think. The challenge is you would think on a traditional sitemap it would be just one box because it's one page, but this student, Terry Carter, did just an absolutely beautiful job of illustrating how a single-page site does have different content areas, and they created this beautiful legend showing what's on the page, what links off the page, and it really brings this page to life in terms of the content and how it's arranged and how it relates to one another. So one of the great things I think we can all agree about being a designer is that we get thrust into industries that we might not ordinarily know anything about. And last summer, we were hired by a venture capital firm that bought up a bunch of yarn companies and put them together as one company called SpinRite. So I got a crash course in knitting and learning about yarn. It was a really cool thing. But similar to the Schick site, they had 4 distinct brands of yarn that served different purposes and served different audiences. And they wanted to put them all on one site and make them all searchable. And so before you even get to the design, you have a real challenge there on how to combine these things and get them all to work together. So the idea we came up with was called the inspiration machine, which is a searching mechanism that allows you to input various things like what's your mood or what's your skill level or what price do you want to spend or what do you want to make, who do you want to give it to. And so in order to illustrate this idea to the client, we created a bunch of usability diagrams that showed, okay, at the top there's going to be the inspiration machine. They will then see search results. They can go off and refine that search and start the process over again. If they don't, they go to a pattern page where they see the pattern, they can add it to the cart, they can save the pattern, and they can share it, and then they go down into the buying process. So this really helped the client understand. It seems very simple, and it is, but it helped the client visualize and understand what we were thinking about. And here were some other decision trees that would inform what fields were shown. So if a user picked a certain field, another field would appear. And this helped the development team. I don't think the client ever saw this because it would be probably not what they would need to see, confusing. But the development team began to understand the process because of this information architecture document. And inevitably, we created the inspiration machine where you can click crochet or knit, you can express it, you can be bold, you can commit to it, you can give it, and you can season it. Here's another case study from SpinRite Yarns. We wanted to optimize, so selling yarn online has been challenging because it's something that you don't really know how much you need. If you're doing a certain pattern, you tend to want to feel it. We didn't solve that problem. But there were a lot of barriers to buying yarn online, and the inspiration machine, more appropriately the pattern-based selling, helped us do that. So the client wanted to know, how are you going to sell a pattern online? Because if they want a different color, how do they change color? So rather than going straight to Photoshop, we created a wireframe in InDesign that organized the content the way a wireframe does, and it walks through the various areas in which the user can change the yarn or change the accessories they want to buy, add them to the cart, that kind of thing. And if the client had any changes at this point, it's very easy to change in InDesign, where it would be much more difficult to change, as we all know, when you're pushing pixels around in Photoshop. And here's the final page. Just enough cape. Not too much, just enough. And the last case study that I'll show is from Energizer Personal Care. Not many people know, but Energizer is a holding company for a lot of companies, not just batteries. And they're located in Connecticut, where my firm is. And through acquisition, they've acquired 15 different brands that you've heard of, like Banana Boat, Playtex baby bottles, Schick razors, brands that you wouldn't think are owned by Energizer are. And I was listening to Jeff's talk about good work and bad work, and I definitely don't consider the work I'm about to show you our best design work, but another way to define good work is to say if you've satisfied the client's need. And the client's need here was they have 15 different content management systems. Well, certainly 15 different websites, if not 15 content management systems. And each website had a different asset set that was needed. So if you needed to make an update for Schick, it was a different process than making an update for Banana Boat or Edge Shave Gel. And the operational costs of that were astronomical. It cost them probably $8 to $10 million a year to maintain all of these websites. And the other insight that they had is, and I find this to be fascinating, and I find it to be true in a lot of CPG companies, is that the website is no longer where companies, brands are engaging their customer. So it doesn't make a lot of sense to have a very expensive website. Brand engagement happens on social media. Websites for CPG companies tend to be more trade-driven. So the buyer from Walmart will come to your Schick.com to find out what SKUs are available and if they want them in the store, that kind of thing. So there was a definite directive from the client to make the websites for all of their brands more homogeneous with a strong drive to social. And even their packaging doesn't highlight their web address anymore, it highlights their Twitter and Facebook feeds. So the goal here was to create highly efficient, consistent brand sites for Energizer Personal Care. So what we put together is something called a UI build kit. You might call them templates, but you're not making enough money. If you call it a UI build kit, it sounds more expensive. So it's a set of wireframes. It's actually an 89-page document of a series of wireframes that explain the various elements of a page. So there's elements like navigation, there's components like the header, and then there's page, I don't like to use the word templates, but there's pages. There's call to action boxes. I won't go through all 89 pages here. That would be not fun. There's polling. Every element that existed on all of the sites that was needed for the new sites was considered and articulated in this document. Bizarre voice integration and reviews, where to buy functionality, and it ended up being, this wireframe that you see here for the homepage for all of these sites. And the way that this kind of manifested itself was in these websites. So Playtex launched, and then Schick launched with Schick Men's, Skintimate Shave Gel, a couple of fem care products, and so on and so forth, Hawaiian Tropics. So you can see at this 30,000-foot view the consistency in asset size. So if there's an image needed for one site, it's the same image size for all sites, so they can begin cross-selling their products. For example, if you're on the Schick Women's website, you can cross-sell the Skintimate Shave Gel, for example, things like that. So this was a tremendously successful project for the client. They went from spending $8 to $10 million a year in maintaining their websites to just under $2 million a year in maintaining all of their websites. So that type of savings to an organization like this is a home run. We also increased significantly their search engine optimization and their organic traffic through this. I think at last look it was up 1,500% to Schick.com alone. So, but probably not on the front page of my design portfolio. So as I was saying before, information architecture can be daunting for a couple of reasons. Some of them I've already discussed. Where does it fit in my process kind of thing. But also because, I always struggled, where do I begin? I heard there's these other programs like Visio, and the last thing I need to do with the time I have during the day is learn a Microsoft program, especially one that looks like that. That would not, it makes the process of information architecture more rigorous. Adobe has some great products. I know you're here. They're really great products. For the iPad, these are wonderful, but again, I have a really hard time digging into them, and I always pick them up and then put them down, and they never integrate into my process. There's also some websites like MockFlow. And what I discovered is what I was doing them in InDesign and kind of feeling ashamed about it. So I've decided to come out of the closet and say I do my IA in InDesign. And the deeper I dug into it, the more I realized it's actually a very, very robust platform for doing IA, especially with the newer releases of Creative Cloud and Creative Cloud 14. Going back to the Ted Williams thing, software is something that in some ways comes very naturally to me. So I get frustrated when people ask me questions. So if you have any questions about InDesign, there are some representatives from Adobe who would be happy to. I teach at the University of Bridgeport in Connecticut, and whenever a student asks me about, like, well, what about the layers? I don't know. These are just things that came naturally to me. I cannot teach you about that. But I've done my best to put some things here that, little tricks that I use that you might find helpful, practical ideas. So here's the Schick sitemap, for example. I have a series of object styles that I use and I have them named as landing page, external link, Twitter link, that kind of thing. So I create a series of boxes and I just use the object styles to color them and style them. Makes it super quick, super easy. There's a zoomed in view. And of course, creating wireframes in InDesign has become very easy because they've enhanced the digital publishing tools, and kind of in between there are the web tools. So the first thing I always do when I'm doing a wireframe is I set the preferences, the units to pixels. That helps. And when you create a new document, you select intent for the web. You select a desktop size like 1024, 768. The number of columns you want with a gutter width left and right, none top and bottom. And you end up with this great canvas for creating a wireframe. And if you do snap to guides, you can put your material on here pretty quickly and easily. It becomes a great way to sketch out designs. But the really cool thing they do now in InDesign, and it's not that new, so I'm sure a lot of you have heard of it, are the alternate layouts. So we're all familiar with the pages that go down the page palette, but you can also create an alternate layout for one page, and it goes next to that page. So in this case, I have the desktop version already, so I can create an alternate layout for iPad, for example. And if you play around with, that is all that I will instruct you, if you play around with the liquid layout settings, the content will move reasonably well for you. So when you create that duplicate page, which appears on the right on the palette there, your items get moved reasonably well. There's a little tweaking and nudging that you need to do, but it's a great way to very quickly see what the desktop and the iPad and the mobile version will look like. It's a really helpful tool in InDesign. There it is there. Of course, you can also add buttons in InDesign. So if you're creating a pseudo layout and you want to think about things like, if I hit this button, does it make sense to go to this page? Does it make sense to go to this location on another page, whatever they are? You can create buttons in InDesign using the buttons and forms palette. And if you export this as a PDF, you can then send it to a client, and they can begin to interact with very easily. There's no coding, there's no real design here either. They can begin to interact with the wireframes and get a sense of the experience that might be delivered, which I find very valuable, and kind of the opposite of designing something and then tracing over it for a wireframe. And of course, export it as an interactive PDF. Any questions about the first part? Question.
Is that in your book?
Is what in my book? That is a very good question. Thank you for asking that. My book has exactly zero technical information because Adobe does a wonderful job of updating their software very frequently, and F&W would not like it if I had to republish the book that often. These are things that I worked out and have a difficult time even expressing because they're the product of a process of trial and error. And I think the message here is that it's possible, and you should find your own method through trial and error. If you do a little digging, you watch a couple of YouTube videos, you can definitely get a lot out of InDesign that maybe you didn't know was there. That was a great question. Thank you. Any other questions? Well, we have a few minutes left. We can just look at my daughters for a little while. My daughter started kindergarten this week, so she's got, and then my little girl was jealous, so she tried to stand in front. And my dog was jealous because he was left inside, so he's photobombing them. But that truly is the last slide, so. Thanks.